That's RV. Right, good morning from Eilat. We're going to talk this morning about RV training. Somehow or other, RV training has become a sort of signature training of mine. It's not because I have any particular affinity to it. It's a very, very useful training. It is not the training. In a lot of the cases, you couldn't even say that it was my training. But I've got my own ideas on it and my own uses for it. So I'm going to share them with you this morning. I hope you enjoy them. Now, first of all, let's get down to what RV training is and what it's not. RV training is really residual volume. Somebody who is going, sorry, that's not RV training. RV training takes time to push the air out. And that is one of the things that you can immediately detect whether a person is going to full RV or not. Here we go. That is RV. RV, we're not trying to do reverse packing. Leave that out of the equation. That's not in it. But it's the maximum that you're capable of exhaling without reverse packing. Now, I've got to talk about FRC. It's not my favorite subject. I have no use for it whatsoever. But I find that I have to at least say something about it. And here's what it is. FRC training is vastly misunderstood. People think, that's FRC, or that's FRC. FRC is from a tidal inhale, that means a normal inhale, to a tidal exhale. That's it. Now, in my opinion, first of all, it doesn't provide enough stimulation for all the things that I want to happen and do happen with RV training. And one of the first things is, of course, and one of the main reasons why we do RV training, is because we want to try and get the body accustomed to reacting to pressure by immediate blood shift. That's your protection. That's your armor against lung squeeze. And that's one of the main reasons why we train it. So in my opinion, it doesn't offer enough stimulation. And although there have been no measurements done, because it's a very hard thing to measure, it also alters from time to time and person to person how much air you actually do let out, what you think is a tidal volume and what you think isn't. So here we go. You can go down a lot deeper because you're left with a lot more air in the lungs with not enough stimulation. So my supposition here is that it's not providing enough stimulus for full dilation of the capillaries on top of the alveoli, which is, of course, one of the things of blood shift and your main protection. Danger being, in other words, you can outrun the blood shift and you can get lung squeeze. It is been for a long time considered to be a milder form of RV. RV is considered to be terribly severe as a form of training. It isn't. It's actually benign because it'll stop you exceeding your limits because you won't be able to equalize. So that's enough said about the difference between RV and FRC training. I'm not a fan of FRC training. I don't recommend it to anybody. It doesn't do enough, and it provides dangers. And I can't see any benefit to it whatsoever. So we'll leave that for a second. Now let's deal with the objectives of RV training. The first is, of course, what I've already mentioned, bringing on blood shift as early as possible. And this is your protection against lung squeeze and the rest of the stuff. Now, other things that it does for you is that it enables you to learn how to hold a mouthful for a very long time. When we begin RV training, we begin at a very, very shallow depth, probably 3 or 4 meters, and then we move on and gradually, systematically, by degrees, most of my people will graduate from first stage RV training at 20 meters. Now, as we go deeper, what's happening is that we actually do less repetitions. When we get to 20 meters, we do 1 repetition only. That's the training. Strange, isn't it? More is not better. This is something that is one of our sayings in all the training for freediving. And quite a lot of freediving, particularly I was horrified when I went down to Dahab and I found that in final stage training, when people were training for depth, instead of just specific training for depth, they were doing everything from yoga to running, to weight training, to body weight training, to everything on the face of the earth as well. All the stuff that should have been done before. In other words, no periodization. They come down, they have a month in Dahab, and they want to compress what should have been a 6-month training into a month, and it doesn't work. Surprise, surprise. It's overtraining. So remember, with RV training, when we're doing 3 or 4 meters, we might do as many as 6 or even 8 repetitions in a session. When we get deeper, as we get deeper, we will gradually do less and less until finally at somewhere near 18 meters, we will be doing 1 repetition only. That is the training. The other thing that I want to mention here is another one of our sayings: rest is training in freediving. Rest is training. It's crucial that we understand that. A lot of people, particularly high-level athletes, seem to think rest is something you do as a counterbalance to training. That rest, is kind of a cop-out from training. It is not. It is part of freedive training. It's where the adaptation takes place. It's a vital part of the training. And this is something that is very little understood and needs to be understood a lot better. How many dives to 70 meters can I do in a day? You're not going to do more than 1 in a day. How many days a week can I do? Well, I'm not going to get into all that, but a hell of a lot less than people think. And a lot less is more productive. Much more productive, and you go forward a lot more quickly. If you're doing 2 dives a week to depth, it may be a hell of a lot quicker than trying to dive every day or trying to do 2 days on, 1 day off, or nonsense like this. That's only for very shallow diving. Okay, the next thing is learning to hold a mouthful for a very long time. That means to say not long in time, but long from the point of view of going through various pressure gradients. in the water, when we're moving in 10 meters to 20 meters on RV, and from the surface to 20 meters, we're going through some pretty drastic pressure gradients, much more drastic than you would get actually at depth. And we're beginning with the amount of air in our lungs that we would have at depth. So think about that one for a second. So it means that a lot of divers on stage 1 are still arriving at 20 meters with a certain amount of air in their cheeks, where they've taken the mouthfeel on the surface. We never take the mouthfeel under the surface. We take it on the surface. All this nonsense on full lung dives of taking the mouthfeel at 20 meters, at 25 meters, it's complete. Why would you do it? It's completely unnecessary. Train yourself to hold the mouthfeel. And the best way of training yourself is, again, RV training. Now, another thing that it gives us, people are driving themselves mad with all sorts of flexibility exercises for the diaphragm and for the thoracic cage and the works. Basically, none of them can produce the kind of flexibility that you get through RV training. They can't even come close. Are they a waste of time? No, they're not a waste of time. But when you come to results, they can't compare. Okay, we're talking about comfort. There's a funny thing, comfort. It's psychological and physical. And it's also incredibly important. We find that when we begin dry RV training, dry breath hold training, that at first our breath holds are tiny because we come into that with a preconception that we haven't got any air left. Again, one of the major diseases in all modern freedive training is overthinking. So we haven't got any air. We forget the tremendous reserves of oxygen that we have in our blood. And therefore, we won't be able to hold our breath. Will we be uncomfortable? Will we get immediate contractions? No, you don't. And it takes quite a few repetitions before the mind understands that this doesn't happen. It's not uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, you begin to understand something, that one of the stretch receptors in the lungs that tells you when to breathe happens when you've got full lungs, not when you've got empty lungs. So when you've got empty lungs, you haven't got that instigation to breathe. I know there are other baroreceptors in the carotid plexus, etc., but let's leave that for a second. You haven't got the same impetus to breathe. And actually, gradually, your progress, the progress in length of time that you can hold your breath, is actually quicker. So it's teaching you psychologically that what you're going to feel at great depth is not an unusual feeling. This is very important. And it's not panicked. Many dives have been lost because people suddenly get a feeling, oh, I haven't got any air left, I'm coming up. They're reacting to pressure. They're not reacting to lack of air, because they find as they come up, ooh, actually, I feel quite comfortable. So it's doing away with a lot of the triggers that make us turn before we should. Another one of the triggers that make us turn before we should is, of course, equalization. I try to equalize. I can't equalize. Bang, I'm coming up. Actually, when you get down to small differences of pressure, etc., you may not be sure whether you've equalized. If you go on, without exaggerating here, I'm not recommending some danger here. If you go on a meter or two, not more than that, and feel if you have got strong pressure in your ears, then of course come up. But before that, you may not know that you've equalized because you're looking for a particular sound, a particular sensation. You're not getting it, so okay, I'm going to jump up. This is terribly common. RV training teaches you an enormous amount about that. So here we are, we're being educated in the depths. And the psychological benefits of passing from 2 or 3 meters in a very short period of time, maybe a month, to 20 meters, wow. Then you begin to understand what's happening. This is all stage 1 of RV training. The other thing that I briefly mentioned is adaptation to pressure. We have things called pressure triggers. It's rather like something that Tai Chi might teach you. When somebody moves their hand or fist towards your body, there is a normal reaction to tense the midsection, to put on your armor against an expected blow. This is what's happening to us when we go down in the water. That fist is actually the pressure, and it's beginning to push on our soft parts, and it gets to a stage where the mind says, ooh, I don't know that sensation. Stop. And how does it pull the bung on us? Simple, we can't equalize anymore. Can't equalize anymore, what do? Come back. So this is also a safety for us, and it's like the great teacher is not letting us push things, unless we're complete idiots, so that we will not do ourselves damage, and until it releases us to do another 1 or 2 meters, we will stop at that point every time. This is called a pressure trigger. And it's part of the game. So, it's also a terrific form of winter training. Briefly, I mentioned the word periodization when I had my little rant about the training that I saw in Dahab. Periodization is critical in freedive training. In your depth training, you should have done all your preparation during the winter or during a period before you came to do your depth training. You should be arriving with 2 periods before you. Normally we divide training into 6-month periods. Now, we subdivide the 6 months into 2-month periods. The first 2 months is non-specific training, health and general aerobic, anaerobic training, beginning of a little bit of lactic training, flexibility training, all the things to improve our general physical condition. And we have 2 months for that. Then we have 2 months of mixed, where it starts to get a bit more specific. What we specifically need. The French have a saying, l'apnée s'entraîne l'apnée. The best training for freediving is freediving. It is. Again, you're training something that no other sport has. When you're doing depth freediving, I'm not talking, and I haven't talked about pool. Pool is something I'll leave to other people. I'm talking about depth training. And next issue that RV training does for you is it gives you a chance to learn different techniques of equalization. We do not teach a Frenzel with full cheeks, the mouth fill. We don't teach that, we don't use it. It's too complicated for a lot of people, and a lot of people are driving themselves into hysteria, I feel, by worrying the position of my tongue, my glottis, is my glottis closed, is my soft palate in neutral, etc., etc., etc. And the mind is flicking between all kinds of things, and it's too much for an awful lot of people. So what we are doing, and again, we teach it on RV, and it's easy for most people to master, filling the cheeks, not overfilling them, while trying to go, but filling the cheeks and squeezing the cheeks as if you were trying to force air out of the lips, yeah, but your lips are closed, so it's not permitting the air to come out. And if you close your nose and try and force more air out, you'll find that your ears pop. Aha! So we've learnt what I would call the cheek fill. Now what's happening here? The cheeks, which can exert a fair amount of pressure, are pushing the air into the eustachian tubes. For that, the eustachian tubes are opening. That will mesh very nicely with a completely different type of equalization that we do in stage 2 RV. So it gives us an ability to do that. Well, there are other things that are less important now, but I'm going to go into because they're kind of fun to play with. So a lot of people like to play with if I'm doing 7 or 8 meters on RV, what's that the equivalent of on a full lung dive? First of all, most of the mathematics involved with that is based on pure nonsense. Do you know exactly how much your RV is? Is it 20%? Is it 16%? Is it 25%? What is it? If you don't know, it's going to make a huge difference. The next thing is it really, does it really work like the nice little balloon going down in the water? No, it doesn't. It's far more complex than that. And I tend to not take very seriously the mathematical equivalence. But if some people want to play with it, good luck with that. Now, in the same way that the equalization that we're recommending in stage 1 leads to the very deep water equalizations that we're recommending in stage 2 after your cheek fill has disappeared, there is another benefit of it, that it leads you to do no warm-up dives. Because when you begin RV training, think about it, you're only doing 3-4 meters. You don't need a warm-up for that. And as you're practicing a lot, day after day, with the rest periods, of course, what happens, you've forgotten all about the question of warm-up breathing. So's your body. And a lot of people have made tremendous progress. Yeah, I wouldn't like to attach a percentage to it, though some of them have reported back to me a percentage, that it's increased their depth by simply doing no warm-up dives. Okay, I think those have covered most of the benefits of stage 1. I'm not going to do a recap on that, that's already long enough. But in this next video, we're going to be talking about stage 2. Stage 2 RV training takes place when you have no air in the mouth and no air in the lungs, and simulates what happens at great depth. And there, the equalization technique changes completely into a very special equalization technique that we've adapted for depth training. And I'm going to talk about that one in the next video that we do. Stage 2 RV training, look out for it.